I'm not really sure if I am well read, but at least my hat is. This is the Seriously Well-Read book tag. It was created by Randy Ray, the literate Texan, as a tie-in for his Seriously Well-Read book club. And I have been tagged in this 5 times. I've been tagged by Kelly from Books I'm Not Reading, Pat from Book Chat with Pat, JJ the Bookworm Blacksmith, James from Quaint and Curious Volumes, and Gavin from Genre Books. So I haven't really been doing many tags recently. I've been more focused on my own projects, but the people have spoken, so let's see if I can answer these questions satisfactorily. The first question is, what book made you take reading seriously? Well, I remember loving reading ever since I was a kid, but I think I've spoken before on this channel about how reading The Hobbit when I was 9 really kick-started a very nerdy, obsessive Tolkien phase for me. I just got really deeply into The Hobbit. I tried to read The Lord of the Rings. I made it through the first 2 books, and even though I didn't finish the third, I still loved it deeply. I decorated my school books with dwarvish runes, all of that good geeky stuff. But also, throughout my life, I have gone through a lot of phases of either reading a lot or reading barely anything. So I don't know how seriously I have taken reading over the years. I can certainly pinpoint certain books that, like The Hobbit, were kind of catalyst books for me. I read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy when I was 12 and got deeply into everything Douglas Adams and started exploring a lot of other classic sci-fi as well. I got into Kurt Vonnegut in my late teens, early 20s. And I think my most recent catalyst book was Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy by John le Carre. I read that in 2019, and I kind of used that book to inaugurate, I suppose, my intention to read every day. It's something that I had let slide for a long time, and I really wanted to develop a daily reading habit, and that was the book that I used to do that. But that was what I went in with the intention of doing. So it wasn't that the book itself kind of inspired me to do that. I wanted to do that anyway, and that was the book I chose to do it with. And yeah, that was in summer 2019, so coming up for 7 years now, and I have been reading every day pretty solidly, apart from like a couple of times when I've been ill, but yeah, I always get back to it now. So this is definitely my most consistent period of reading throughout my whole life, really. Question 2 is, what book did you pretend to understand? Be honest. I will be honest. I don't recall pretending to understand anything. I'm kind of compulsively honest, and I would hate to try and pretend to have understood something and be caught out in the lie. So if I haven't understood a book, I will be honest about that. I may well have had to spout some bullshit at school. I don't really remember that anymore. But anything that I've read for my own personal enjoyment, yeah, I will admit if I haven't understood a book. So, one book that I remember not understanding, not really getting at all, was The Stranger by Camus. I I think a friend of mine gave me a copy when we were teenagers. He loved it. I was baffled by it. Didn't get it at all. Did not see the point. I now have a better understanding of existentialism, and I think probably more interest in that whole kind of area of fiction and philosophy. So I might I might have better luck if I reread it, but I no longer have a copy. So yeah, maybe I'll revisit it and hopefully get something more out of it if I try again. But yeah, I'm not really racing towards it. Question 3 is, which 3 books are on your personal required reading list? Well, this is another thing that I think I've spoken about in a previous video. I did the high school required reading tag a year or two ago. I can't remember exactly now. But I spoke then about my aversion to required reading. I didn't have a great time at school, and I didn't love a lot of the books that we were required to read. So the idea of forcing other people to read anything just because I say so doesn't appeal to me. So I'd like to kind of reframe this question as 3 books that have influenced me in a big way, and if you want to have a better understanding of me as a person, then these would be required reading. But that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone has to read them. So I am perhaps obviously a big Terry Pratchett fan. My channel is named after a Terry Pratchett quote, and I think if you want to get a better understanding of my sense of humour and my worldview, then Terry Pratchett is probably required reading. So I would recommend Weird Sisters. That's the 6th Discworld book, the 2nd in the Witches series, and it has a lot of ties to Shakespeare. It basically asks the question, what if the 3 witches from Macbeth were the good guys, the heroes of the story? It also has elements of Hamlet in there. It has a playwright who is clearly based on William Shakespeare and is kind of overwhelmed by the sheer amount of inspiration he has. He can't even keep up with all of the ideas he has. He can't write them down fast enough. And these ideas are coming, I think, from another dimension, because some of the ideas he has include bits of films from the Marx Brothers and Laurel and Hardy. So this is clearly a book that was made specifically for me. But of course, to get the most out of that, you do also need to read some Shakespeare. And I think putting Shakespeare on a required reading list is the least controversial choice I could possibly make. So it's got to be Hamlet, hasn't it? Now, for my 3rd choice, I mean, I would love to include some Ursula K. Le Guin as well. I am a massive, massive fan and admirer of her, and her Earthsea books in particular have been a huge comfort and inspiration to me over these past 5 years or so. But I think that would be kind of weighting the list too far towards fantasy. I've already got Terry Pratchett on here. So another genre that I am particularly fond of is murder mystery. So I think I would have to include an Agatha Christie book, and it's hard to pick which one, because there are a lot of great ones, but I think let's avoid the really obvious Murder on the Orient Express, and let's say The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. That's one of her earlier Poirot books, and it's one that I didn't love the first time I read it, but the second time I read it, I thought it was amazing. And I think that's a good lesson to remember for me as well, that sometimes it takes a second or third reading to really get the most out of a book. So yeah, let's say The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. I'm honestly not entirely convinced or happy about that list, but I can't think of anything better at the moment. Question 4 is, what author have you been avoiding? Well, I don't know if I'm overthinking this here, but have you been avoiding seems to suggest that you intend to try them at some point, rather than just what author do you avoid. For example, I do avoid Ayn Rand. Everything I know about her books and her worldview just does not appeal to me in any way or sense, and I therefore avoid her books and intend to continue avoiding them. But authors that I have been avoiding but hope to give a try to at some point, I think maybe Franz Kafka is a good candidate for that. My best friend Rachel is a huge fan of Kafka, and when we first met, she gave me a couple of Kafka books in her favourite translations of them, and they've been sitting on my shelf for over a decade and a half at this point. So I definitely intend to get to Kafka sometime, hopefully soon, but I've been slightly intimidated by what I expect to be quite heavy reading, emotionally heavy reading, that is. But I am also, intrigued, so I do want to read that. I just haven't. Question 5 is, what's the hardest book you've ever finished? Now, again, I'm overthinking this, but there are lots of different ways in which a book can be hard. It can be just very dense prose, very confusing in some way. It can also be emotionally devastating. So, for emotionally devastating books, one of the hardest books that I remember reading is Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. It's, it's all about grief, the loss of a child, and I read it either the year or maybe the year after I lost my mum, and my mum was a fan of Maggie O'Farrell. So, there were a lot of emotional associations tied up in that. It was a very emotionally draining and difficult book, and the fact that I'd never read any Maggie O'Farrell while my mum was alive, and then I didn't have the chance to discuss that book with her, and she never got the chance to read it. That was a very, very hard experience. But like on a prose level, it was an absolute pleasure to read. It's beautifully written and very easy to read on a sentence by sentence level. It's only really the emotions that are really hard. But in terms of books that are just hard on a sentence by sentence level, hard to comprehend, just hard to get your head around, Shakespeare can often be challenging. It's written in an archaic form of English, and his writing can be very dense and just difficult to get your head around. And even as a fairly seasoned Shakespeare reader, Troilus and Cressida was still extremely hard work for me. So that's another candidate, just in terms of, it felt like a slog sentence by sentence. Question 6 is, what's a book that changed how you read? And I think for this one, I'm going to have to lean on Shakespeare again and say Much Ado About Nothing. And the reason this changed how I read is because I read this in preparation for appearing in a production of it. It was an amateur production in Oxford in 2017. And I played a very small role. I played Friar Francis, which is kind of hilarious to me because I'm very much not religious, but apparently the vibe that I gave off to the casting team was vicar. So that kind of struck me as funny. But reading Much Ado About Nothing with a mind to acting in it. So learning the lines and really poring over every single line, not just mine, but everyone's in the play. I really wanted to understand the play as best I could because I was acting in it. And that approach is something that I think I've carried over into what I read generally, especially plays. I think reading plays takes a certain slightly different approach to reading a novel, and when I read a play, I'm imagining it not as a novel but as a staged production. I'm thinking about just how it would be done, how it would look on stage, who you would cast in the roles, that sort of thing. And thinking about what you're reading in historical context as well. What the audience or reader would have made of it at the time, not just what we make of it now. All of that has been a really big influence on how I read. So Much Ado About Nothing definitely influenced my reading in ways that I haven't really thought about till now. So that's a really interesting question. Question 7 is quality versus quantity. Would you rather read 100 good books in a year or 10 great books? I find I don't get through 100 books in a year, so that's too many, and 10 would be too few. So, again, I may be overthinking this, but you see, do we know in advance? Is this some sort of magic thing that we can know in advance that we can either read 100 books and they'll all be good but not great, or we can read 10 books and they will all turn out to be great? Because I don't know what I'm going to think is great before I read it. But, I like to have my daily reading habit, so I would have to pick the 100 good books and hope that some of them might turn out to be great. But honestly, even if they just turn out to be good, that's still good. At least none of them are bad. So yeah, I'll take that. 100 good books, please. Question 8 is, which genre are you embarrassed to say you have not read? Well, I don't really like to associate reading with embarrassment. I don't think someone should be embarrassed over what they either have or haven't read. And beyond that, I don't think there are many genres that I have any interest in and haven't read anything in. I mean, even genres that I'm not a huge fan of, like horror or romance, I've at least read something in those genres. So, yeah, I don't think there's any genre that I'm embarrassed not to have read. I'm either not interested in it at all and therefore not embarrassed not to have read it, or I have read something, even if it's not much, and yeah, I don't have a good answer for this one. Question 9 is, which book do you think most people misread? Well, I'm going to have to go back to the Shakespeare well once again. And okay, so misread is maybe too strong a term. I've spoken before about how Shakespeare, according to Emma Smith, has a quality called gappiness, and his work affords many different meanings and interpretations. However, there is a particular, quite popular take on Romeo and Juliet that I don't like, and I find uncharitable at best. I see a lot of people reading it as if it's a very preachy, cautionary tale about stupid kids who are led astray by their hormones, and they should have listened to their parents and none of this would have happened. And I think, again, according to Emma Smith in her chapter on Romeo and Juliet in This Is Shakespeare, she points out that if you want that moralistic version of Romeo and Juliet, then it's not the Shakespeare one, it's the source material that he adapted into Romeo and Juliet. That's the cautionary tale version. And the changes that Shakespeare made when he wrote his Romeo and Juliet, he leans very much more on the idea that it's the parents' fault. It's their fault for maintaining this feud for years, and that's the real tragedy. That, yes, Romeo and Juliet were young and impulsive, but none of that would have been disastrous if their families weren't mortal enemies. So, it really comes down to the families, and I mean, he says it in the prologue, even, that it's Romeo and Juliet's deaths that lead the families to bury the hatchet as they bury their children. And finally, question 10 is, what does seriously well-read mean to you? And this is the question that I have the most difficulty answering, because I'm not sure it's ever really been my aim or my intention to be well-read. and I don't know if you can declare yourself well read. That feels a bit like trying to give yourself a nickname. But if if my aim were to be well read, then I think for me it's not so much about necessarily having a set selection of books that you have to have read. It's certainly good to have knowledge of them and, to be aware of what the sort of the Western canon is and what books have been particularly influential over the centuries. And, I have a fairly good understanding of that, but a lot of them I haven't read. I've read a lot of Shakespeare, and obviously he is a massive cornerstone in the Western canon, but I've not read a lot of, say, Charles Dickens. I've read A Christmas Carol, but none of his full-length novels. Tried a couple, but couldn't get through them because they're bloody long. I've read one Jane Austen, but not much. I've not read Pride and Prejudice. I've not read Chaucer. I've not read Canterbury Tales. I've not read the Odyssey or the Iliad. There's a lot of stuff that I haven't read, and I suppose in some people's eyes that would mean I don't qualify as being well read. However, I think what's more important to me is not so much being well read as reading well. It's about the practice of reading and how I approach a book, how I read it with attention to detail and just due care and thoughtfulness. He said thoughtfully. I think that's what's really important to me. And that's something that you can do with anything, whether it's Shakespeare or Terry Pratchett. Terry Pratchett is a very rewarding thing to read. He's also incredibly entertaining, and that means a lot to me as well. So yeah, I don't know if I would call myself well-read, but I like to think that I read well. But these prompts do go up to 11, and the 11th prompt is to tag others. This tag has really taken off, and I've seen loads and loads of versions of it already, so I don't know if there's anyone that I can tag who hasn't already done it, but I'll have a quick glance and see if I can find anyone. But if not, if you are interested in doing this tag, then please consider yourself tagged. And if you don't have a channel, or if you do but you don't feel like doing the whole tag, then I'd love to hear in the comments your answers to any of these questions. So that was the Seriously Well-Read book tag. Thanks again to Randy for creating the tag, and to Kelly, Pat, JJ, James and Gavin for all tagging me. It was really fun to overthink all of these questions, and I hope that you all enjoyed listening to my rambling answers. Anyway, I hope you're having a lovely day. That's about it from me today, and I will see you when I see you.